Thank you, Nicole. So tonight I'm going to be doing a little evolution of video games. And I say little because there is so much that's happened and it's really hard to compile it in this amount of time. But we're going to try, and this little dude's going to go along for the journey. So we're going to start and we're going to look at the early days. First of all, who here is a lover of video games? I mean, I'm guessing if you're here, you probably like them. Yeah, nice. That's a decent majority. Okay. So we're going to start all the way back in the 40s. And in the 40s, computers, well, I mean, the first one was in like 45, and it was the size of a room. So the fact that we're starting our journey here is pretty exciting, because what that means is that people made computers and pretty much instantly they were like, what can we play on them? Which I think is really fun. That's so nice. The 40s. Okay, so 46, this is when we have our first ever programmable computer. It was unfortunately made for the war, but, you know, a lot of cool things come out of the war, I guess, technology-wise, this one being one of them. They originally actually made it for, like, artillery something or others. What was it? Artillery firing tables. They wanted to be able to look at those, and thermonuclear weapons. It turns out that was successful, and so was the ability to do arithmetic, which was something new and exciting. So here we have computers just appearing, which is great. Here we've got in 47, not the first video game that ever actually got created, but the first concept of one. It never went to market, and some debate whether it's even considered a video game because it didn't really use a computer. But the cathode ray tubes were something that they used that had like these little lines, and it would have been cool. If you Google it, you can see these little lines, and it's just like this screen with sine waves and stuff. And they wanted to use it to make like a little tennis game, and people have tried replicas of this later, and it's kind of cool actually. But no games existed yet. Very sad. Not for long though, don't worry. Welcome to the 50s. Here we have these little matches here. Oh, there was a picture there. It's not there. That's okay. That little dude's cool anyway. He looks like he's from a game. There was a matching game. So Nimrod was a mathematical game, and the idea of it was that it focused on strategy. So people wanted to show that computers were good at logic and that they could do logical things. Let me just get that there. Yeah. So they were like, okay, so how can we show that? And actually it was through this mathematical game called Nimrod. So in 51, this actually finally got launched, although it was being developed in the 40s. They also started to develop this game called Tennis for Two. That's the one you see here, and this was actually on a very similar like cathode ray thing. So I don't know exactly what they used these for, but it was like for seismic activity and that kind of stuff. You could see all the sine waves. Somebody actually, it's like, you know, the calculators that you program Doom into. They kind of did that. They got something in a lab and they just programmed a game into it, which is really cool. There still were no commercial products at this time. But there was some tic-tac-toe going on, and the picture that was there is a picture of a screen maybe this big, and it was like a whole big box computer, and somebody dedicated it to tic-tac-toe, which I thought was very cool. So the 60s, here we're actually starting to get some traction. So Space War, was anybody around or remember Space War? I'm gonna go linearly to see when we actually start getting some like, yeah. So this one here, this is Space War. So this was essentially one of the first ever video games to be produced, depending on how you define it. And it was developed by students at MIT who just thought it was really cool. And they made it open source, which I think is really fun. And it actually had a really big impact on the way that games then proliferated, because by making it open source, it then meant that other people could play with it and toy around with it without having to come up with the really grounding programming stuff themselves. So it was pretty cool. And then we had Ralph, I'm going to say his name wrong, Ralph Baer. So he was the first person to ever come up with the concept of a console. So he came up with what they called the brown box. So the brown box was really just a brown box, but it did come with the intention that it would actually carry the capacity to then be able to play a game on a screen. It never got made, but it was the first of its kind. So that was very exciting and really spurred a lot of inspiration in the community, which is really cool. So in the late 60s, we start to see arcade, like very just like budding arcade stuff. Okay, arcaders, anyone who played the arcade back in the day. Could be 60s, 70s, yeah, arcade's good, yeah. I mean, I also played in the arcades in probably the mid to late 90s, and I come from a small town where they didn't develop technology for a long time, so we had an arcade for a while. It's like in the desert, so consoles didn't come for a bit. So interestingly, the founder of Atari actually learnt everything that he needed to know to then develop what Atari became from just working and playing in the arcade. So Atari obviously ended up being a really big name and doing a lot of cool things, and that all just came from hanging out in an arcade and having a good time. It's a good idea. The 70s here. Now, people may be starting to remember these times, and also this is when I think it starts to get a bit more interesting, because we're going to actually start seeing stuff that got made. So Computer Space was the first ever commercially viable arcade game that ever got created. Does anybody remember Computer Space? It was in 71. I actually don't know. I haven't played this one. But it was one of the first. And then Pong. So Pong is, you know, that's something I think we all know. I actually knew it because of Neuralink with the monkeys. I don't know if anybody knows that, but they embedded chips in monkeys and actually got them playing Pong, which is crazy. But yeah, back in the early 70s, people were just playing it in the arcades, which is much more user-friendly, I think. Home consoles actually started to get developed now. So the brown box was the concept, and we're like, oh, this could be a really cool thing. But here we actually start to see the Magnavox Odyssey. So that was released in 1972, first ever, but struggled hard. Like really didn't do super well. Commercially, it essentially failed, but it was a proof of concept. So it is actually possible to have a home gaming unit, which is pretty revolutionary if you think about it. I mean, not that long ago, computers were rooms, and we used the power of a toaster to get to the moon. So the fact that we could have games at home is pretty cool. It wasn't that much later, in 75, that Atari actually released a home version of Pong. So that was a dedicated console. So at this point, we still don't have consoles that can do their own thing. Like you put a cartridge in and you can, you know, play different games. They had dedicated consoles at this point, but Atari did that in 75, and that was really successful. I mean, Pong, that's, I think, probably why we know Pong so well is because of this moment when Atari brought it home for us. It wasn't until the Fairchild Channel F in 1976 that we ever see the first experience of I can bring a console into my home and change cartridges in and out and then go and buy different games for the same cartridge. So that was in 76, and that was a really pivotal moment. And Atari just like jumped on that hard, and they were the Atari 2600. So that was in 1977. Does anyone remember that one? Yeah, David. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so good. Yeah, I played the Atari 2600 as well. I wasn't there in 77 for it, but I played it. It was a good time. And this was big money. This is when it starts to be like, okay, we can actually do something with this. Companies are starting to think this is interesting, inventors, scientists, etc. We're now entering the golden age of arcade games. So this is when arcades are absolutely taking off. It's integrated in people's lives, and I mean, why wouldn't it be? I would love to have been around for that time. It would have been so good. Mainframe games, so the ones that were embedded in those room-sized computers, were much more focused on strategy. So people were still developing these things. They weren't going commercial or anything like that, but there were people developing them to be used as like, how can we make a logic puzzle and prove our computer's better than other computers because it's good at this logic thing? Whereas any of the stuff that was made for now people at home, now that we've got these new cartridgeable consoles were all kind of action or just a bit more like, combat based or something like that. So we had the Star Trek 71, Hunt the Wumpus, I've never heard of that one, in 72, and the Colossal Cave Adventure, introduced in the mainframe. Did I just hear some recognition? Yes, nice, that's so good. I have no idea, I haven't seen that one. Woo. So third-party developers now at this time were starting to emerge as well. So Atari programmers that were kind of like, I want to get out of this system, I don't want to be so confined, I want creative freedom, they then started to break out and do their own thing. We're like seeing baby little indie devs at this time, which is very exciting, given that computers were still super expensive. For somebody to say, I want to break out and do my own thing, would have actually been super hard. So I don't know how they did that, but they were programmers for Atari, so they probably did know what was going on. So they started Activision at that time, which actually continues pretty hard. So that was what year? I don't know exactly what year, but it was in the 70s. So this was a period of really rapid development and technology. As we will see every decade from now, it's just more rapid, the technology development. Pong. To the future. So now we're going to be looking at the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and beyond. So this is the next part. It's an arcade game thing, and it's got a rainbow on it because it's the 80s. So this is when we really start to see a golden era of arcade games. So it was like 70s was pretty gold, the budding sort of like little flecks of gold maybe at the end of 70s, but 80s is just like really going hard on it. So Pac-Man, so 1980 Pac-Man. Now, surely we know Pac-Man. I know Pac-Man, yeah. Donkey Kong, 81, also a really big hit. They essentially just became embedded in the culture, which, yeah, I mean, they're embedded in my culture for sure. And it also just kind of introduced a bit of narrative into games. So if we're looking at, previous games are very just like you're doing a thing and you go to the next part and you just kill some stuff or whatever. But now we're actually starting to get stories really embedded, which will later down the track sort of go into where we actually see some new genres emerge, but not yet. We now see in 1983 a video game crash. So in 83, we have this like surge of commercial development around games, but not at a very good quality. So we're getting a lot of really, am I allowed to swear? No, just really shitty games, just really bad games. And throughout North America, people are just like, they get a bit bored of it, and there's a whole lot of loss of interest. It's just like, it just goes out. So that led to a huge sort of dip in consumer confidence. Like, is this even something that's viable? Is it something sustainable? And then, there's, the stocks, and I don't know much about finance, but people lost money and it was bad. There's a whole thing about it you can read, yeah. Then Japan comes to the rescue and just saves the day by making some really good quality stuff. And of course, Nintendo, like, soon as I'm thinking Japan and games, I'm like, Nintendo. So they released the NES. And the NES was essentially the revitalization of this crash. So that completely revamped the US market once it got introduced there in 1985. And that's when we start to see things like Super Mario Brothers and my all-time favorite, Legend of Zelda. Yeah. I hope nobody's dissing Zelda, because I'll have words to you later. And Metroid as well, that was a good one. Yeah, it's pretty good. So handheld gaming as well. And actually, before researching this, I didn't even know that this is when handheld gaming came out. That's crazy. In 1980, we actually saw the Game & Watch series came out, which then led to, in 89, the Game Boy. I don't know when I thought it came out, but I didn't think it was in 89. So that's very exciting. So here we actually have now, again, in just like the last few minutes of discussion, we've gone from computers the size of a room to we can do this in our hands. So this was a really big time. Portability and just like things like Tetris. People are just going mad for it. Super Mario Land, Bugs Bunny's Crazy Castle was a big hit. I never played it. The Commodore 64 was another advancement in personal computers, and things like this just start to make, I don't know, people are just using technology more. They're more used to it in their homes, and it's now becoming something that you can actually hold in your hands. It saw the beginning of like the bit wars, which is when companies were marketing themselves based on the processor's bit size, which is something you really start to see in like the late 80s, early 90s. So yeah, the 80s were a good time, apparently. I wasn't there for it, unfortunately. But lots of cool colors and, again, advancements in technology. The 90s, now I can speak with my own experience. This was a good time. This is when we start to transition into 3D. So before we've got our very much like our like Super Mario and the pixel graphics which are throughout this thing even when we go into 3D, and it's very cool, but now all of a sudden we can like represent things in three-dimensional space, which, oh my god, if you were like, I can't even imagine if I was alive at the time and had just watched the last 30 years and just seen gaming go to the point where it could be three-dimensional. I just think it's unreal, actually. So it was initially popularized in arcades, as all the good stuff was in the beginning, and then it started coming to home consoles. So Wolfenstein 3D was a big one, and Doom, which can be programmed on anything. If it exists, you can put Doom on it. And of course, Mario and Zelda were just getting better. Ocarina of Time, my first tattoo. That was a good game. Anyone play Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask? Yeah, that's right. That's good. So handheld gaming here was just increasing in popularity. It was just getting better. Sega released a Game Gear. Did anybody use that? Yes. You did? Yeah, nice. I didn't know about that one. That sounds pretty good. And Atari had a Lynx. Pokemon Red and Blue, which was a good time. That was a good time. Yeah. That came out around now as well. And this is where we start to see the new genres coming in. I think with 3D, it's just like this introduction to, I don't know, it just opened up a whole new variety of games. And it wasn't just 3D. I think it was just the increase in technology, more people being able to actually develop these things, more accessibility. But we've got things like real-time strategy. I mean, Warcraft Command and Conquer was something that came up around then. And survival horror games, so Resident Evil, that was new. There was, to my knowledge, there were no like horror games before that one. And now, role-playing games, my favorite. I love RPGs, so they started to come out, and now we're really seeing sort of intricate storylines that we can embed into even potentially simplistic games. They can have really deep and meaningful and connective experiences embedded in them. So that's really starting to happen now. We've got Final Fantasy, which was, I think, at number 7 already by this stage. Who knows? I don't even know how many there are these days. There are a lot. But with all of this, of course, came a bit of controversy with the regulations. How do we limit what our children and / or just people in general are exposed to? So Mortal Kombat and Doom were really some big ones here that sparked these debates. So that led to the establishment of the Entertainment Software Rating Board in 1994, where we started actually getting some kind of like, hey, if you're 8, you might not want to play this sort of thing. Or you might. And then in the very late 90s, we start to see the kind of emergence of online gaming, although I think that was probably reserved for like some particular people that were more into computers in general, but it started, and I think that's a pretty big deal. So that was the 90s. And now we're looking at the early 2000s. So in the first decade of the 2000s, now is when we really start to see the rise of some new consoles. So the PS2, Who here owned a PS2? Yeah. And you know why? Because it was actually the best-selling console ever. I found that quite surprising, but I guess it makes sense. They integrated the ability to watch DVDs and old games on it, which meant that it was just super accessible and people appreciated that. And, you know, CD-ROMs were all the rage back then. So the fact that you could play your DVDs on it was pretty cool. I had a PS2. I loved that. It was a good time. Dark Chronicle. So much fun. Jack and Daxter. Did anybody play that? Yeah, I know, right? It's so good. So Microsoft came in here with the Xbox in 2001. Xbox Live starts to happen. The GameCube, did anybody play that? That was one of the least well-selling things, but it was so good. I loved the GameCube. There was like a master edition of, was it Twilight Princess or it's like the Master Sword edition of Ocarina of Time something. It was really good Zelda stuff on there. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, you get it. Oh, it wasn't in New Zealand? Oh, that's so sad. I used to play like Pikmin. Yeah, it was such a good console. Yeah, I wish I never sold mine. Oh, so sad. Yeah, so Xbox 360 comes out in 2005. That's also a big hit. I mean, you've obviously got this competition now starting between, you know, Sony and Microsoft, and then you get the PS3 in 2006. Which was just, again, they just keep coming out. What number are they up to now? Even like five. Actually, it's pretty crazy. They haven't gone, yeah. Yeah, there you go. I'm not a PlayStation fan these days. So the Nintendo Wii as well, which again, I think Nintendo is more catering to families, but the Wii was cool because I had motion sensor stuff. And, you know, if you're into something like Zelda, then you're going to keep getting the Nintendo like I did. But otherwise, a lot of people were going towards things like Sony and Microsoft. So the Xbox 360 and PS3 were more focused on graphics, and you know they had the dedicated capacity to do that. And yeah, something like the Wii was more story-based and motion sensor. Here we see online gaming actually really start to take off. It's much more accessible to everybody. So the internet, people are using it, which is great. So the PS2 actually started to begin incorporating those services. I don't remember ever using online with the PS2. I don't know. Maybe you could. The Xbox as well. The Xbox Live was in 2002 actually. So that introduced multiplayer. And multiplayer, I mean, that's just a whole new world where you think of gaming before as like, oh, people like in their house playing by themselves. All of a sudden now, you can have a socially good time and actually still be gaming. And if your parents are like, oh, no, you got to be social, you'd be like, dude, me and all my mates are having a great time. And you see indie games growing even more now. So pretty much at every decade we go through, you're going to hear me harp on about indie games getting better. And that is just because we now, like, with more accessibility, people can just be like, oh, I have this awesome idea. I want to make it into something. And they actually have the ability to do that, which is really cool. And Minecraft was somewhere in there as well, which is obviously the biggest thing. Who's played Minecraft? That's gonna... Actually, less than I was expecting. I feel like Minecraft is such a big thing. Yeah, I actually didn't play it till like this year, but it's a good game. I recommend it. You should try it. It's fun. Mobile gaming as well. So now we're starting to see things like smartphones and tablets, and all of a sudden, it's just like a whole different kind of feel when you're playing on a smartphone and tablet. So there's a kind of, not quite another genre, but there's a whole other way of playing that's starting to be introduced here. And you get those like free to play things, which later become those little sneaky microtransaction things, which is kind of gross. But I don't know, in these days it kind of was free to play, which was really nice. So now we've got 2010 for the next decade, and really here we're just seeing again console evolution. So we've got the Xbox 360S, the PS4, and the Xbox One. So we're getting even better graphics, and like social integration and online connection is just getting more. So everything's just getting augmented at this stage. So we've got like the Nintendo Switch as well, which came out in 2017, which I think is one of Nintendo's better selling consoles other than the 64, which I think did quite well, because the Switch gave you this capacity to have like handheld gaming but also have on screen, and again it has Zelda, so and you know, we have things like Skyrim coming out, which was just, you know, a good time. Does anybody remember any cool games from this time that came out? So Skyrim was one of them. Is there any other major games that anyone remembers and loves? Yeah, Fallout 3. Wait, is that the one that has been released or hasn't? Oh, Fallout. Which is the one that's not... Oh, yeah, nice. Yeah, I haven't played it. It's so good. Yeah, cool. Yeah, and we also see like cloud gaming, which is really cool, because now you don't have to have all the hardware yourself, which can cost a lot of money. There are online services that give you the capacity to have, you know, better graphics cards and stuff. And I mean, it's still pretty primitive at this stage. But these services are starting to come up. So like Sony has the PlayStation Now, Nvidia has the GeForce Now, Microsoft has xCloud, and Google has Stadia. Amazon has Luna, and there are just more options for people that don't have a rig at home, which is nice. Yeah, and now we really start to see some very early touches of augmented and virtual reality. I spent most of 2010 to 2020 in the jungle, so I didn't experience that. But I remember in the Philippines at one point, I went into a city and I went into the mall and they had like these little things you could try on, and I was like, dude. Like, I'd just been living with no electricity or running water, and then I went in and I saw these virtual reality goggles and I was like, whoa. So yeah, it just kind of starts around now. So there's like the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive, and then PlayStation VR. I've never played Skyrim VR, but I reckon it'd be pretty mean. Oh, and Pokemon Go, when people were like walking out into oncoming traffic and like walking off buildings. And, I mean, obviously there's some things we have to work on with just like humans and stuff, but like the technology's there, so that's good. How am I going for time? I didn't check when I started. Okay, six. So mobile gaming's getting even bigger. People are accidentally paying more. I remember hearing stories about people's kids like buying like 1 million gems on like a free-to-play game or something, and then all these sorts of issues. So they're actually, in this time, free-to-play starts to become a bit dodgy. In my opinion, where you're getting all these ads and stuff like that, but it's still a bit better than it is now. Indie's getting better again. We've got lots of independent game developers and Kickstarter. Crowdfunding stuff is taking off, which is really exciting. Steam now is like, that's always on my computer. Like, that's just like a part of my experience. So that is I think that's really cool. It's a place where if you are like me in my backyard tinkering around with a game and I want to produce it, there's now a platform that reaches essentially anyone that wants to play a game that I could potentially publish on. So this is really huge. And we also see esports starting up. Yeah, esports. So like Dota, I was a big Dota 2 fan, and I used to watch my favorite team Na'Vi play pretty often. Dendy, when he hits mid, so good. So you can watch games online now, and people are training like down to the microsecond with their mice, and you got to click, and the little creepers are going through the jungle, and you got to get them, and it's $2 million for the tournament or something. It's becoming a huge thing. Like, it's actually a sport. People are wearing colors and they're painting their bodies pretty much. I would have, if I was at a live game, I would have painted my body. Yeah, oh, the PC's running low. Yeah. That's okay, because we're on the last slide. So here we're looking at essentially now and beyond. So what's happening now? Well, we haven't had that long. What year is it? 24. So we've had 4 years of this decade. And, I don't know if anything that exciting's happened except for Baldur's Gate 3. That was fucking mean. I'm still playing that right now. It's so good. I'm like 200 hours in. No spoilers. It's a good game. Everyone should play it. So we've got the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S. I actually don't know that one. Not an Xbox fan myself. I use the controls for my emulators, but that's about it. So that happened in November 2020. And then, we've just got way better graphics and like all these different kinds of technologies integrating in, like real-time ray tracing, and just, things are getting fun, and they're getting hopefully cheaper to make, but not necessarily cheaper to buy, but still you're getting better quality for the price you're paying, which is super exciting. COVID happened, which just was like, everyone's like, I want a game, and the industry got massive and then kind of crashed because everyone's like, okay, I got to go back to work. So there were a heap of layoffs and people lost money again. That sucks. But yeah, in 23, we saw like quite a lot of people, up until 23, between 21 and 23, there was a lot of gaming going on. So now what next? And I mean, that's kind of an open question. I've got VR and AR because, that's what I'm looking forward to. When I can just put my contact lenses in and see you all as aliens and change the color of the walls and stuff, that's going to be sick. But yeah, I mean, what is next? I mean, there's obviously thoughts about sustainability. I mean, the way that they actually develop these technologies and the minerals they have to mine to get them, and the way they do that, and how much energy it takes to keep these servers going. And I'm pretty sure Google has a server in like the far Arctic or something because it's more sustainable for cooling and stuff. We've got a lot to think about in terms of how we actually sustainably continue our gaming experience. But, we've also got really amazing minds on the job, so hopefully we can get there. And also ethical things. Like, Disney's doing a great job right now, not that it's gaming, at doing things like female protagonists and like minority groups being the main features of stories. Hopefully we see more and more of that in gaming as well. I think we are, but maybe not in gaming as much as we are, other forms of media. So hopefully gaming really does start to sort of like pick that up and go. I think with gaming, a cool thing is that you can sort of choose your character a bit more, which is really nice. But yeah, we'll see things like expansion of the cloud gaming experience and that whole metaverse thing. Who knows? I don't know, maybe that will actually work, maybe it won't. I don't know. But yeah, thank you for going on this journey. That was a graphic, an animation, and it did say game over.
We'll take a couple of questions now, if anyone has any.
You touched on this very throwaway comment about emulation and your wrongs.
Oh yeah.
What's your opinion on emulation, especially of games that are no longer in circulation, but then people still being kind of prosecuted for this emulation or archiving of old game material?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting question. And I think it's kind of like how when there are authors who no longer sell their books or they've passed on and they don't, you can download this, what is it, the public sort of domain and Creative Commons. I do think that media in general, it makes sense to have some sort of time frame where at some point it actually just becomes a human experience that we can all share, that this person has sort of brought out to us, unless they explicitly state, I don't know, in their will or something, that I don't, that, I want all the proceeds of this to go to this thing. But it's like, if that's not in circulation anymore, I mean, personally, because this is a personal opinion, I think that if you're sharing the intention of it, then I mean, I think it's great. And I mean, I have, you know, emulated old games that I have on the 64 because you can like levitate and shit. It's so good. Like you can break the game in really fun ways. Like you jumping over walls and stuff. And yeah, I don't know, adding cheat codes and just modding the crap out of it is so fun. So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's up to each company to decide how they go about that. Like, for example, with Nintendo and say their old 64 games or the NES, I think if they're not doing anything to enable you to enjoy it still, then fair game. But that's an opinion that I don't know if I'm allowed to have, so... I mean, I would have to say from like an emotional level, it has to be Zelda. Like the whole, like really like the whole thing. I mean, Dragon Age was really cool as well. I loved Origins and Dragon Age 2. That was super fun. I love sort of combinatorics in games where you can choose like multi-layered things like a race and then, you know, what your sort of storyline is, your origin, and then you can choose a character configuration and sort of choose your own adventure. I do love that a lot, but Zelda just has, I don't know, artistically speaking, especially Majora's Mask, I mean, he wrote it in like a very limited amount of time, and so he had the engine. Oh, no spoilers, but if you play Majora's Mask, the way it's written, it was written in a very time-pressured situation, and the game reflects that. The art is incredible, and it's just so deep and beautiful. Yeah, I just love that series so much. I don't think there's another game I love more than that. Good question. Yep.
Have you or do you want to develop growing and if
Oh, yeah.
it's put into a single project?
Oh, that's the part I'd find the hardest, I think, actually. Yeah, that's tricky. A single one. Oh, I don't know a single. I can tell you vibes. That's what I can say. I really love abstract algebra and I love group theory, which looks at symmetry. So I'd really love to develop a magic system that actually plays on that. So like using the different groups and the different configurations that you can have that follow the rules, essentially, how could you then overlay like a fantasy system onto pure math, genuinely? I don't even know what game that would be or how I would do it, but that's the one. And I would love to write like books about it too. Like I just, yeah. I don't know what the graphics would look like because it would depend if I'm doing them. Because if I was doing them, they'd look like the pixel art you just saw. If someone else was doing them, or maybe Unreal Engine. Yeah, I think something with a sick magic system would be cool. And starting from like real Survivor, sort of like, in the jungle or something, and then going to like sort of into space stuff and like magic stuff. Yeah. You're welcome.
Wonderful. We'll end there. Thank you so much.